Hello, and this is my presentation for the Fukushima Japan Nuclear Disaster 2011. My name is Kenny Burns, and this is for the Regional Geography of the World 2017 course. In this slideshow presentation, we're going to discuss the demographics, geography, and culture of Fukushima, Japan, detail the events and facts of March 11, 2011 earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan. We'll also discuss the nuclear disaster that struck Fukushima, Japan, examine the environmental impacts as a result of the nuclear disaster, examine the human impact of the radiation exposure, discuss present-day Fukushima since the disaster, and examine changes to prevent repeat disasters. As we go through the presentation, we'll cover the 5 themes of geography as they pertain to the presentation. These are location, place, human environmental interactions, movement, and region. So Fukushima, Japan is a prefecture in Japan. Now this is in northeast Japan, and prefectures in Japan are like states are in the United States. So they're made up of different prefectures, and of the Fukushima prefecture there are 59 municipalities. And the municipalities are like counties or parishes in states in the United States. The Fukushima prefecture is in the Tohoku region of Japan. Now the Tohoku region covers the large majority of the northern Japan country. The population of Fukushima is 1,914,039, and that was as of October 1st of 2015. The capital of Fukushima is Fukushima City, and the area covering the prefecture is 13,783 square kilometers, which equates to about 5,321 miles. Fukushima is located 200 kilometers or 127.27 miles north of Japan. Fukushima prefecture borders the Pacific Ocean, and it roughly cuts into the country a little bit, but the majority of it is on the Pacific Ocean. As far as the region goes, the region is a commercial, industrial, and agricultural area. There are over 130 hot springs. There are numerous tourist attractions with these hot springs. The area produces grains, rice, tobacco, fruits, and vegetables. In the coastal areas, fishing industry is big into the economy. It brings in fresh seafood and seaweed. In the manufacturing field, there's electronics, silk, yarn, textiles, bonsai trees. These are all produced in this region. Now the Fukushima power plant that we'll be discussing is actually located in Futaba, Japan. Futaba, Japan is located here on the North Pacific Ocean. Fukushima City is actually located north of the prefecture, and when people refer to the accident they say Fukushima, Japan, which doesn't actually mean it's in Fukushima City, but it's in the prefecture. It's actually located on the southeastern border of Futaba, Japan. Let me make sure I pronounce it right. Futaba is actually how it's pronounced, but Futaba is located on the eastern coastline of the Fukushima prefecture. Now Futaba is home of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. It was home to 6,126 people before the evacuation after the power plant suffered its damage. And the town covers about 19.85 square miles, and it remains uninhabitable due to the radiation that still exists in the city now. On March 11, 2011, the earthquake struck Japan, It was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake which struck Japan on Friday, March 11, 2011 at 2:45 p.m. and that's Japan Standard Time. The earthquake struck 230 miles northeast of Tokyo and 15.2 miles deep into the earth. Now this was centered into the Pacific Ocean, and to give you an idea, this is pretty deep underneath the bedrock below the ocean. The earthquake lasted 6 minutes, and it was the 4th largest recorded earthquake in history. And I believe they started recording earthquakes, if I remember correctly, around 1900s. Might have been a little bit before that. The resulting tsunami had a wave of 38.9 meters tall in places, 127 feet. Now that wasn't the entire tsunami. Some were low in places. This was the largest recorded wave that hit Japan. As a result, 15,891 people died from the earthquake and the tsunami. $30 billion in damages were done as a result, and 5,000 aftershocks, the largest being 7.9, occurred after the earthquake. And as you can see here, the star is where the earthquake occurred. The Fukushima Daiichi power plant is circled right here, and then Tokyo is right here. So as you can see, the northern part of the country was the hardest hit since it was in such close proximity. Some interesting facts that I located on this earthquake, which I never realized before, is that the earthquake was so strong that it shifted the planet on its axis 4 to 10 inches. And it was just due to the tremendous force whenever the tectonic plates moved. And as a result, the length of the day was shortened by a microsecond. The time was shortened by the way the axis of the Earth was moved, and it caused a microsecond taken out of the day. Now, the earthquake moved Japan's main island east about 8 feet. Now, when we talk about the island, this entire island here was moved east 8 feet as a result. And the 250 miles of Japan's north coast dropped by 2 feet. Now the waves from the tsunami traveled as far as Hawaii, Alaska, and Chile. The ocean bed moved 50 feet and 16 feet vertically. And the ocean floor moving with the North American plate moving is the reason Japan's main island moved so much, and the coast dropped as a result of those tectonic plates moving so drastically. And as a result of the tsunami, 15 million tons of debris were carried out into the ocean. Now, how did the earthquake happen? Well, Japan sits on the North American plate, and as the Philippine plate on the bottom half, but the Pacific plate dives underneath the North American plate. And this is the subduction zone, which creates the Japan Trench along the subduction zone. So as the Pacific plate is diving underneath the North American plate, it creates a large trench there. As these plates start moving, they cause friction, and the friction of the rocks hold together cause the friction. As the plates continue to move, tension is created. It's the best way you can describe this. Just imagine rubbing sandpaper together. There's a lot of resistance, and they don't want to move. And this creates the land masses locking up. Scientists drilled into the seabed after the earthquake to try to find out why this occurred, why the earthquake occurred. They found clay sediment on the floor of the seabed, and this clay is really slimy and slippery, and it was drug into the trench. As a result, there's a layer of this clay between the two between the two tectonic plates in where it dives underneath the North American plate. Scientists believe that the slip of the two fault lines, the two plates, was a result of the clay. They think that it caused the plates to slip a little bit easier than they would have if it wasn't present. The friction between the plates caused a temperature of 1,100 degrees to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. As a result, the plates rubbing together when they broke loose and caused the earthquake. Now the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The plant is located on the Pacific coast in Futaba, Japan. The plant has 6 nuclear reactors. The nuclear plants in Japan in general supply about 30% of the Japan's energy. Now, as far as the nuclear disaster goes, this is kind of set up as a timeline to kind of show you what happened during the nuclear disaster. Now, the earthquake hit at 2:46, 2:45 I had listed earlier. Depending on which sources you look at, they say 2:45, 2:46. Electricity was lost at the plant, and diesel generators turned on to pump water into the nuclear cores. The earthquake separated electrical lines from the power plant to the main electrical grid, and they rely on the electricity to pump these generators. They pump water into the core reactors. At 3:27 p.m., the plant is hit by 7 tsunami waves. As a result, the generators stopped running as the waves hit, disabled the generators. People were evacuated in a 3-kilometer radius around the power plant as a result. On March 12th, residents are evacuated in a 10-kilometer radius. And the nuclear cores overheat without pumps in Unit 1 and 2. And from what I've read, the way these nuclear reactors work is that the cores have these the rods made from nuclear material, and they have water around them to keep them from overheating. And as the pumps were not working, the water was just sitting around these cores. They would heat up, the water would start boiling and evaporate away. The water levels would go down, exposing the cores. Then the cores would overheat and become very hot as the water wasn't cooling them down. And then as a result, the steam rising, interacting with these hot cores, were creating hydrogen gas, and that was creating explosive gases in these units. And as they got too hot, they ignited, and this would cause the explosions. Fires in some of them released radio material from the cores, but we'll go over that here in a minute. Unit 1 blows up on March 12th. This is one of the first explosions at the power plant. As a result, residents are evacuated in a 20-kilometer radius, and radiation is detected near the power plant. Salt water is pumped into Unit 1 as an emergency way of trying to keep these things cool, keep from having any further explosions. Because even though there's an explosion, the steam can still create more hydrogen gas that cause more explosions. On March 13th, seawater is pumped into Unit 3, and then the next day on March 14th, Unit 3 explodes. At this time, they're having a hard time keeping these cores cooled down because these nuclear cells are very, very volatile. March 15th, there is a hydrogen explosion in Unit 2. As I said, the waters were too low, and steam was coming up and then interacting with the fuel cells, and they were causing hydrogen gas, which caused the explosion. Fire breaks out in Unit 4, releasing radiation. This is what I was speaking of. The fire is just burning material, and it's just causing more radiation to leak out of these units. Radiation levels of 400, this is a hard word to pronounce, millisieverts is how to pronounce it. 400 millisieverts are found near the power plant. Now, normal yearly levels for human beings to be able to absorb without causing any major health effects is 2.4 millisieverts. Now, on the 16th of March, fuel rods suffer damage, releasing radiation at the plant, and replacement generator pumps arrive at the plant, and they start pumping water again. Tokyo has has elevated radiation levels in their water, and then on March 20th, Units 5 and 6 were finally stabilized. March 22nd, wastewater has 126 times radiation level. These wastewaters are from the plant as they're trying to cool the reactors down. 11 types of local vegetation have above legal levels of radiation. This is just a local area around the power plant. And on March 23rd, water has twice the recommended level of radiation. March 26th, seawater 330 meters south has 1,250 times the legal limit of radiation. And then on March 31st, plant discharge of seawater has 4,385 times max safe limits of radiation. So at this point, what they're doing is they don't have any water to pump through the chambers except for seawater. So they're taking seawater and pumping them into these nuclear cores to cool them down. Many of them have been exposed. A lot of times on these units, they're contained, so the water's just cooling them down. They're not actually being exposed to radiation. Because of the explosions, a lot of this radiation material is exposed now into the units. So seawater is dumped in to try to cool these down, and as a result, they're dumped back into the ocean with high levels of radiation. On April 2nd, a crack is found in the water intake in Unit 2, and as a result, seawater has 7.5 million times legal radiation limit. Now this is a large jump from March 31st to April 2nd, and it doesn't really explain, when I was doing the research, why it jumped so high, but a lot of the nuclear material was exposed, and it probably has a lot to do with it. On April 12th, the nuclear accident is given a level 7 rating, the highest possible. This is the same rating that Chernobyl had whenever they had their plant meltdown. And all reactors units are eventually stabilized. Now the environmental impact. On here I've got a picture that shows where Fukushima Daiichi power plant is. And this is the 30-mile radius. This was the largest radius they had for this disaster. The 20-kilometer radius was the evacuation zone. And from the 20-kilometer to 30-kilometer zone, this area here was not an evacuation order, but an order to stay indoors. They could evacuate if they wanted to, but it was not mandated. The 20-kilometer, everybody was evacuated out of there. Radioactive elements, iodine, strontium, let's see here, strontium is how it's pronounced. Strontium and cesium were released into the atmosphere. These were the three main radioactive materials that they were recording and trying to take data on. The radiation entered the air, soil, and water. And soil was severely contaminated and is still unstable to this day around the nuclear power plant. The levels of radioactive material in the Pacific exceed levels of Chernobyl. Now, the cesium, the cesium-137 radiation was found 600 kilometers in the sea from Fukushima. And local bird populations in the area of Fukushima dropped by 30% as a result of radiation. Radiation was carried over the North Pacific by prevailing winds. The prevailing winds take it to a northeastern carry. It goes over Alaska, Hawaii, and then eventually over to North America through the prevailing winds. 79% of the cesium 137 drifted above North Pacific, 19% was above East Japan, and 2% eventually made it to North America and as far away as Europe. On March 22nd, let me see here. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my thing. Okay. So the environmental impact, the strontium-90 has a half-life of 28 years, causing leukemia, and it was located 30 kilometers from the plant, where the farthest they detected it after the explosion. The iodine-131 has a half-life of 8 days. causing thyroid cancer, and it was found in milk, drinking water, vegetables, seawater in North Japan, and it was located 40 kilometers from the plant. Now the cesium-137 has a half-life of 30 years. It can cause tumors anywhere in the body. It was found in beef, rice, milk, fish, and drinking water, and it was located 20 kilometers from the plant. Now the cesium, I think, was the one they found a lot in the water as it was being pumped out of the plant. Now all of these were found, but I think this was the one they were most concerned about with the levels. There has been a population drop in animals, insects, and wildlife in and around Fukushima. Scientists have found that the pale grass blue butterfly has a high mortality rate after the disaster. The barn swallow birds have been found with white spots on their feathers. The Japanese macaque monkeys have low levels of red and white blood cells. Many areas around the plant can no longer produce crops due to the radiation. They can produce crops, but the levels of radiation, they can't make it to market due to the high levels. Rain deposits radiation in the atmosphere. As of today, there is still radiation leak from the power plant, and as it raises in the atmosphere, rain deposited on the earth, and as a result, the runoff of the rain contaminates other areas. They've tried to decontaminate areas on the far fringes of the evacuation zone, but rain runoff continues to cause issues of recontaminating the area. Plants and vegetation, plants were affected, and cows were contaminated by eating the vegetation. Cows in the area were eating grass, and as they went to market, the radiation in the grass had entered the cows, and a lot of meat was unsafe. Mushrooms were found to absorb high levels of radiation, and mushrooms are a part of the diet of Japan. And for some reason, the mushrooms absorbed a lot of the radiation higher than other plant organisms. And 3.3% of all food had unsafe levels of radiation, but were removed before hitting shelves. This is because the government monitors all food before reaching markets. After the disaster, Japan took a lot of initiative to try to monitor these foods more closely while it hits every single step in the process to get to the market. Now, the human impact, there were 159,128 people who were evacuated from their homes as a result of the explosions. Homes were uninhabitable, uninhabitable and left with little compensation. Many residents still haven't returned home after the disaster, and it's been 6 years since the disaster. Radiation levels are still high, but the government hasn't compensated the residents fairly as far as the citizens are concerned. There's been little compensations, and 70,000 residents still live in highly contaminated areas outside the evacuation zone. So that's the area between 20 and 30 kilometers we talked about, that they weren't forced to evacuate but asked to stay indoors. Based on research on Chernobyl and other research, scientists have figured that 70,000 residents who are still exposed face a 2% chance of cancer. And then, like I said, these are rough estimates. The report said that these are just rough estimates. They haven't had a lot of time to research the area like they have with Chernobyl to see if these are actually going to be true or not. Okay, so on human impact, some nuclear plant workers were exposed to 1,000 millisievents of doses of radiation, which were fatal after a few hours. 8,300 workers were sent to Fukushima Daiichi power plant for cleanup, and a lot of these workers still there now trying to clean up and decommission some of these reactors. 111 workers were exposed to radiation higher than 100 millisievents. The dosage of radiation that workers were exposed to were 20 times lower than that of Chernobyl. Now, Chernobyl was a lot worse as far as radiation exposure to the workers. And in October 2015, one of the workers involved in the cleanup at the plant had developed leukemia. And I don't know what the exact number of workers are that had developed any type of cancer from the radiation exposure. This is just one of the examples I found. In this case here, they actually offered the employee compensation from the government, which many recognize as the government accepting responsibility for the disaster. There were some deaths at the plant as a result of the earthquake, tsunami, and the evacuation. But none as far as the radiation goes. There hasn't been any reported deaths from that. And the evacuation especially was dangerous because with the flood water coming in from the tsunami that washed many miles inland, a lot of people were caught off guard and died as a result. The children are highly susceptible to radiation due to their high metabolism and their underdeveloped immune system, as well as other factors. In March of 2011, tests were done in Latate Village, Iwaki City, and Kawama Ana Town, where tests were done on 1,149 children. Thyroid glands were tested at 44.6% had levels at least 30 MSV. And as you recall from earlier in the slides, I think it was 2.4, 2.6 was the safe yearly dosage to have in their system. I think children are lower than that, but as far as adults go, these levels are way higher. There was testing done on 300,476 children in the Fukushima prefecture, the whole region of Fukushima. Out of those tests, 50% had nodules or cysts on their thyroids. 110 cases of cancer were confirmed, and this is 30 times higher than the normal rate in Japan. Test data and care will be needed for decades for residents. And as we've seen with Chernobyl, tests and recording data goes on for decades to see what the results are of the nuclear exposure to the residents. Now in present day Fukushima, I picked this caption on here. This isn't in Fukushima, but it's in Japan. I believe it's closer to Tokyo. This caption says in Japanese, "Nuclear power, the energy for a bright future." And I picked the photograph because a lot of residents now are wanting to get away from nuclear power, and many have protested the reopening of some of these power plants that have been destroyed in the tsunami and earthquake. So in present-day Fukushima, 6,000 employees work at the nuclear power plant daily. These workers work to stabilize the plant to keep it from having meltdown, because at any time it could if it loses energy again. And they're also trying to decommission the power plant. Radiation is still dangerous around the plant. No one will be allowed around the surrounding villages for a while. Much of eastern Fukushima prefecture is uninhabitable. The government is removing contaminated soil in the exclusion zone, and 7 municipalities have lifted evacuation orders in the area, allowed some residents to come back in. Decommissioning of the plant is 10% completion. Radioactive cooling water stored on site in tanks, but they are running out of room. One of the pictures I saw, round tanks fill the land around where they're trying not to dump water back into the ocean. Changes to prevent nuclear disaster. The Fukushima Daiichi plant was not adequately prepared to handle such a disaster. The Fukushima power plant was a result of human error and not so much because of the earthquake and tsunami. The earthquake and tsunami are the reasons that it failed, because of the damage done, but the human error, the lack of procedures to prevent the meltdown, or what they're referring to. And we'll get more into that on why that's the case with this power plant down here. But U.S. and Russia are designing a nuclear power plants in the sea, like oil rigs. Or U.S. has looked into it. Russia is actually building one right now in St. Petersburg. These will sit out in the ocean like oil rigs, and they're submerged under water. And the nuclear reactors pump water into the cooling chambers, and then pump them back out to keep them cool. They say they'll be more effective, and they won't actually come in contact with the nuclear fuel cells, but they will heat, or they'll cool down the surrounding areas like heat sinks, like you would have in your computer. As their water's dumped back into the ocean, they're supposed to be completely safe. Now the Onagawa nuclear power plant was located closer to the earthquake and had higher tsunami waves. Excuse me. Now this power plant was north of Fukushima, and the waves were higher and the earthquake was stronger because of the proximity. The reason they were able to survive the earthquake is, and tsunami, is they actually built their power plant higher on the edge of the Pacific Ocean to prevent tsunami waves from actually damaging the power plant. Now Fukushima actually decided to build lower because it's easier to get trucks in and out, and it was a cost-effective way of building the power plant. But as a result, they were hit with the tsunami waves and suffered more damage. It survived the disaster with a successful cool down of its reactors. Onagawa had an emergency center at the plant and company headquarters. This is so they could have supervisors and engineers on site to talk with the workers and communicate with them and help them with the cool down to prevent the meltdown at the power plant. Now the power plant participated in seminars and panels to improve its safety training. The owner of the power plant, that was one of his main goals, is to make sure to prevent any damages to the power plant in case of a disaster, keep from contaminating the environment. It has strict protocols for disaster response, and due to the preparedness, the power plant avoided a meltdown unlike Fukushima. The committee that evaluated the Fukushima disaster stated that regulation issues resulting from a culture in Japan of not questioning authority. They're trying to change the culture in Japan. Japan has one of those authoritative cultures. And new policies were not found in my research. I've looked for new policies that have been in place as a result of the disaster, but I couldn't find any. I don't know if it means that there doesn't exist or I just didn't find them. All right. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.